Hey people, it's Julie. Today I'm going to talk to you about something really uncomfortable. Now I know I've already covered every writer's least favorite subject, rejection, but this is kind of along the same lines, but maybe even slightly more uncomfortable for some of y'all, but I really want to be really real with you today. So let me start this off by giving you a little background. I have seen lately some people on Twitter or on blog entries kind of embarrassing themselves without realizing that they're embarrassing themselves by announcing to the world that everybody's going to be so sorry when the writing that they're trying to sell right now hits it big, and all these people are going to feel dumb for rejecting them because they're the next Walt Whitman or they're the next Stephen King, and maybe even making comments like that today's editors wouldn't know a good writer, or today's agents would have rejected some famous author. And when I see people say stuff like this, I realize that it kind of comes from a place of pain sometimes, that they're kind of trying to give themselves a public pep talk saying, I know I'm great, I know I'm amazing, and one of these days I'm going to show the world. And on one level, that's a healthy thing to believe. You should be able to give yourself a positive pep talk, tell yourself that one of these days you're going to make it and all of this rejection is going to be behind you. I want you to feel like that. I want you to look forward and I want you to be positive. But I also don't want you to slip into the mistake of believing that the reason that you're getting rejections has to be because you're a misunderstood genius, or at least that you're just being misunderstood, period, that there's not actually anything wrong with either your approach or your material. And too many times I'm seeing this, people, I guess, defending their work or themselves by spouting that they're among the greats and just undiscovered, and that they believe that they're one of these luminaries for the future of the writing community, and that all these people who are failing to recognize this are somehow terrible at their job, or somehow completely ill-informed as to what makes a good story. So I've heard these people saying, like, this editor would have rejected Tolkien, J.K. Rowling would have gotten rejected in this environment. Well, they're actually probably right, because most people don't want to hear this, but publishing does have a lot to do with luck, and it does have a lot to do with happening to write what is appropriate for the market at the time that you're submitting it. And you can't really control that, because you can only look at it retroactively and say, we could see the signs that this was coming, or this was rising and this was falling. It's really, I don't have any advice as to how to ride that wave, because I've actually kind of made some statements about that before, about how you should write what you're going to write, and that way you're not scrambling to catch up with a craze that has probably already become saturated by the time that you see it being popular on the bookshelves, that there's really no sense in chasing those trends. But what these people are right about is that if some of the classic writers of the past tried to write what they were writing in today's environment, they wouldn't be able to sell it, because now that's been played out. In opposition to that, those people were pioneers in their day. Those things didn't exist. They were very innovative, and in some cases, like with Tolkien, they revolutionized their genre, and then everybody who tried to write in that genre from then on was being compared to him, and in many cases were taking a lot of influence from him and maybe even copying him. So anyway, this is becoming a little bit rambly, but my point here is that you can't just blame the writing market and the decision makers for failing to recognize how amazing that you are, because what's going to happen is you're just going to keep doing the same thing over and over again and getting more and more bitter until either you quit or you say something in public that ruins the potential for your career. Now, the thing is, most of the writers that I interact with are the opposite side of the spectrum. They don't think they're too good for anything. They actually often have confidence issues and worry that they're not good enough to get an agent, or that no publisher is ever going to want what they've written. And, I don't like to see that either. I don't want to talk to those people and make them feel hopeless about this. But what I want to stress here is that what you should strive for in your approach to your publishing is a balance between being able to take criticism from agents and editors and sticking to your guns, so to speak. I'm not going to say that there aren't those pompous agents and editors out there or people who misunderstand your work. It is possible for them to misunderstand. They aren't all completely right. You don't have to take in and accept and change according to every piece of feedback that you get, and that does include people in the publishing industry. Just because they're a major publisher editor or they're a big shot agent does not mean that they automatically are right about your work. And I've certainly received a couple of rejection letters for short stories where I think, wow, that was unnecessarily pompous, or I get a response that suggests the reader just really didn't understand the story. But my response is not to say, well, nobody can understand what I write because I'm this amazing literary genius, and therefore the world just isn't ready for me. The world just doesn't understand the greatness of my writing. I'm not doing anything wrong. It's the world that's wrong. Well, if it's the world that you want to impress, and it's the world that you want to reach with your communication, you can't keep thinking of yourself as so above it that they can't touch you, because then exactly who are you good for? Just yourself. So, when people say something to you about your work that you think is incorrect, or it represents a misunderstanding of what you're writing, do your best to take from it some constructive criticism, and even if they're wrong about what they've said about your work, maybe change your stuff or change your approach to sending out your stuff, so that people don't make that same misunderstanding again. It doesn't mean you have to change it in the way that they expect you to. Like, I might use a personal example. I had a book at one point that I was trying to get an agent for before I found representation for a different one. And I was told by one of the agents that I'd pitched that the voice was too old, and that they believed that this was a young adult story. It was not a young adult story. I did not pitch it as a young adult story, but somehow, because of the age of the protagonist, the person who read it believed that it should be a young adult voice, and they gave me this whole lecture on how I need to learn how to do a better young adult voice. I wasn't trying to do a young adult voice, so I could kind of take that to mean that what I needed to do in my pitching is make it very clear that this is not a young adult book. So if the agent had not misunderstood it as a young adult book, she probably wouldn't have sat there expecting it to sound like a young adult book and lecture me on how I should make it sound like a young adult book. So, it wasn't that I looked at that and thought, wow, I guess I need to make it a young adult book. It was more that I had to adjust my approach to pitching it to people so that people wouldn't make that same mistake again. So, I encourage you to take any piece of feedback that you get, whether it's from a test reader, whether it's from an agent, whether it's from some kind of mentoring program, or whether it's from an editor. Take a nuanced approach to understanding what they're saying to you, but you really need to avoid internalizing this bitterness that the real problem is that you're amazing and no one can understand that. You may be surprised how that will come through. We will be able to see that in your attitude if you believe that you're God's gift to the literature world. Especially if you praise yourself in your pitching materials. You talk about how unique you are, or you suggest to them that people just don't have the courage to take on something as bold and as unique as you. I have seen actually a ton of these in situations like mentoring for Pitch Wars. I'm not being a mentor this year, but I did it for the last 3 years, and I did see an occasional really egotistical query letter where I don't know if the writer who sent it in like that had any idea how out of touch they sounded by talking about how innovative and new their work was, especially since when people do that, they often have an idea or a character that's already been done many times. There either isn't anything innovative about it, or they're not showing that aspect of it for us to decide that for ourselves. And I think that's the takeaway here. We need to be able to take away for ourselves that you're amazing and that you're a genius and that you deserve a publishing contract or an agency representation. So you don't have to tell us that, and you certainly don't belong telling us that if we say no to you, it means that we're the problem, we're the ones who just don't understand you, and one of these days you're going to be laughing at us. That sort of attitude is really just very counterproductive to being able to succeed in the first place. Not only because it's rude and no one wants to work with rude people, but because it actually inhibits your ability to grow as a writer. If you already think that the problem is the world, you're never going to succeed in that world. So that's all I have to say for you today, and I hope you tune in next time. Thanks for watching.